morning, Tri-Cities. It's 9 o'clock and it's time for Coffee with Karl. I'm Karl Dye from TriDeck. And today we have two very special guests. And our topic is the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures, which is a really exciting new development at WSU Tri-Cities that we're super excited to have Noel Schultz on, who is the director of Institute for Northwest Energy Future, or from now on, I'm just going to call it INEF. Good morning, Noel.
Good morning.
Great to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
And our very own Sandra Haynes, who of course is the Chancellor of WSU Tri-Cities and also in a lesser role, the chairperson of the TriDeck Board of Directors. Good morning, Sandra.
Good morning. I'm not sure that's a lesser role, but thank you.
Well, just there is a hierarchy. I wanted to start off with thanks to our sponsor for Coffee with Karl, Mike Miller at Moon Security. We just saw his video on there. Mike and his team do a great job offering security solutions for businesses and private residences in the Tri-Cities. Their offices in downtown Pasco. They have great customer service. I was going to say broadcasting, but we're not broadcasting. We're having a webinar from my home office today because Mike and his team, well, Mike's probably not there, but his team is doing some fire testing at our office today. And so we didn't want to be interrupted by fire alarms while we were in our webinar. So thank you, Mike and Moon Security. Okay, we always start off with our mug story or coffee story. And I almost made a faux pas and got the wrong mug, but I then got the right mug. And this is an extremely authentic Viking and Nordic cow horn mug that Sandra actually gave me for my birthday. We took a trip with the governor and a trade delegation to the Nordic countries last year. And because I'd watched a bunch of Viking shows on Netflix, I wanted to get a horn type mug, and I got one in Stockholm, and then I left it in my hotel room, and Sandra was kind enough to get me this awesome mug that's very clearly, Nordic and Viking authentic as far as I know for my birthday. So thank you, Sandra.
Well, it was specifically for Coffee with Karl, so I'm glad you.
That's right. Exactly. Noel, do you have a mug or coffee story you want to share with us this morning?
Yeah, I do. Hopefully you can see this is the latest and greatest WSU Tri-Cities mug. And, I'm celebrating the opportunity to be much more involved on the WSU Tri-Cities campus. And I am actually a tea drinker. For some reason, growing up, my dad had tea with milk. So I have had tea with milk growing up. And so, I just want to represent the tea drinkers of the world that might be on with Coffee with Karl. So
that's awesome. Just out of curiosity, is there like an English, because obviously tea with milk is a very English thing, or just your dad liked it?
I don't know. My dad liked it. I didn't know where it came from, but we just had it growing up. I had tea with milk. So I've learned to drink coffee because it is a coffee drinker's world, but tea is my preference. That's
awesome. Thank you. Sandra, how about you? What mug or coffee story do you have to share with us this morning?
Well, I have my mug that I actually bought in Finland when we were there. I thought that was apropos. This is a little disturbing without a face or a head here, but it's a representation of a cartoon that they have for children on pro-social behavior and good emotional responses to things. And so I thought it was appropriate because a lot of INEF, or the hard launch part of INEF, was a direct or maybe indirect result of our trip. So I thought this would be a good representation. I have my favorite caffeine drink too. When in doubt, I always drink tea, and when I have to, I drink coffee. But right now I have a fizzy water with caffeine in it.
Oh, there you go. It's all about the caffeine. Yeah, and I appreciate your reference to how they teach kids in Finland. I think that was just from the trip. It was cool. We got to go to, I think it was like a primary school, and see how they, the kids are educated. Very educational, I think, for all of us to see the student teacher ratio and the kind of daycare is integrated into the school system. Yeah, really, really good learnings and great crossover. Like you said, a huge connection to INEF. Yeah. So let's start with Noel, could you give us some of your background? And I just asked, like, are you English because you drink tea and milk? But where'd you grow up? Where'd you come from? And how did you come into the WSU system and then the WSU Tri-Cities?
Yeah, thanks, Karl. So I actually grew up in Virginia. I am the daughter of a electrical engineer, PhD, my dad, and an elementary education teacher. So two EEs, just two different EEs. I grew up all over Virginia and ended up, my dad was teaching at Virginia Tech and my mom worked in Blacksburg, Virginia. And that's where I got my my undergraduate and master's degree in electrical engineering.
Yeah.
That's also where I met my spouse when I was a freshman and he was a junior, Kirk Schultz, who's a chemical engineer. And so we met at Virginia Tech and a few years ago. But after we finished at Virginia Tech, we moved to University of North Dakota, where I was an instructor and Kirk was a faculty member. Went back and got my PhD at University of Minnesota. And then we have been at Michigan Tech in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Mississippi State, Stark Vegas, Mississippi, Kansas State, in Manhattan, Kansas. And then in 2016, we moved to Pullman, Washington, as part of, as Kirk became president of WSU. And 2023, I'm moving to the Tri-Cities to be more involved in INEF.
That's great, thank you. And just looking at the colleges and campuses that you guys were at, were all those land grant institutions, out of curiosity?
All of them, but Michigan Tech. Well, actually, Michigan Tech, North Dakota were not. So North Dakota State is the land grant. So, but yes, Mississippi State, Kansas State. That was kind of our goal, was to be at a land grant university.
Yeah, thank you. Sandra, what about you? I know your background, but how did you come to the Tri-Cities and the WSU system? What's Sandra's backstory?
Yeah, I always hate to go after someone with a very interesting backstory because I have kind of a boring backstory. So I was actually born and raised in Denver, Colorado. And when I did go to college, as sort of a non-traditional and first-generation college student, I went a whopping 60 miles away to Fort Collins, Colorado, to Colorado State University, a land grant institution. And one of the reasons I've always been attracted to land grant institutions is that idea of access for all students. So I've been wedded to that for quite some time. And then I stayed there through my PhD work and through my respecialization work. So I always used to joke with the department chair that he needed to give me tenure because I had been there for 7 years and didn't that warrant tenure, but he didn't think so. But anyway, I went to, I did an internship at UC Davis, another land grant institution. Yeah. And I was fortunate enough to get a job right out of that internship, but back in Colorado, back in Denver, and I was at Metropolitan State University, starting as a faculty member, working my way up into administration at that institution. And I ended up here because I was really looking for that next challenge in my career. And this was an opportunity, right time for me, and seemed like exactly the right place. And it's turned out to be true that it's the right place. So I'm happy to be here. And I've been here now 5.5 years.
Sandra, we definitely agree with that this is the right place. You are the right person for your role and all the roles that you play in the community. And I have to say, because I mean, we're so proud of you, but being a first generation student and a non-traditional student as well, like you'd think the chancellor of WSU Tri-Cities would be more of a traditional academic path. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. It's an important point. And I think that it's cool because as you relate your story to so many of your students on the WSU Tri-Cities campus, I think it's very relevant. And that's, I think that's the connection that we all need. We need somebody that says, hey, I was just like you, when I started out. And, you know, there's, you get in the system and you work hard and you have a mentor and, you know, all these things, here's where you can end up. So I just wanted to point that out. We're very proud. That's a great story. Thank you.
Thanks, Karl. Can I just add to that for just
Of course.
because I'd like to brag about our students who half of our students are first gen students. So it's really, it's really rewarding for me to be here and to see them, you know, take that chance on college and to work hard at it and do so well. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing. So Institute for Northwest Energy Future, this is what we're here for today. Sandra, I'm going to ask you to kick it off. Like, how did, like, what was the journey to get to state funding and Noel becoming the director for the Institute? Like, where did this start? What's our story here?
Well, it is a little bit of a long story. Well, at least maybe 4 or 5 year story. So
Yeah.
now I have a philosophy as a higher ed administrator that an institution of higher education can't just be located in a community. It has to be of a community. And so when I got here, I made a point of figuring out what this community was all about. And it didn't take too long to see that we have a very high focus on agriculture. We have a very strong focus on the environment, especially with our cleanup mission, but also with preserving this beautiful river that's right outside my window that's causing a little bit of glare this way. And also we're all about energy here. We're all about energy in so many ways. We have such rich resources around here with regards to energy. And we have a lot of companies that are very invested in energy in multiple ways. And so those 3 things really stood out for me. The 4th thing that became apparent was, of course, our growing population and our healthcare system. But anyway, I started looking around and trying to measure the strengths of our institution and tried to match them with what the community was doing. And we have the Bioproduct Sciences Laboratory here on campus, which is a joint venture with PNNL, and very much is focused on energy, actually on the fuel side of energy, although there's other bioproducts that come out of there. But so how do we match this strength with what the community needs? And so in talking with the community and talking with the faculty, it was also clear that the community and the faculty were looking at energy as a strength of the Tri-Cities writ large. And there was one person in particular that was very focused on that, and that was Bob Ferguson. I think we all know Bob Ferguson or know who he is, and he was definitely a pillar of the community and a large force in shaping the Tri-Cities. And we were meeting with him, and he brought up the idea of, we have all this land at Hanford, couldn't we have an energy park at some point in time? And I have to say that probably led to my statement later on of clean up to clean energy. So the original, but there it does have roots. But anyway, he decided to invest in WSU Tri-Cities and to start the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures. So with his generous donation of $500,000, we soft launched the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures, INEF. That's much better, Karl. A few years ago. COVID happened and all those things along the way. But we didn't stop developing out the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures. We did a lot of things along the way, but we didn't hard launch the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures until this year. Because last year, last December, the governor came to campus and announced that he was going to ask for funding from the state. He was going to put it in his budget for the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures. And again, he learned about the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures on our Nordic trade mission, which is again why we have our Nordic gear here today. So he liked that idea. He was willing to invest in it. We went through the legislature. It seemed to resonate with both sides, and we got $7.7 million to start the Institute. So then our first goal there was to hire a director, because we knew we needed somebody to get the ship going and keep it going in the right direction. So we were very fortunate to hire Noel Schultz. She has an excellent reputation in engineering and electrical engineering, and she brings the power side to us. So now we've got the power side and the fuel side here located on campus. So we're very well positioned to move into the future of INEF.
Yeah, it is, like I said, a 4 or 5 year story, but you did a good job of putting it all together. And I have to say, Bob Ferguson, we were honored. There was a tribute to him. Actually, it's where the Hanford History Project is going to be housed, right? Like the new building across from Porta Benton. And I just had a chance to meet him one time before he moved to Arizona, before he, got sick and unfortunately passed away. But I don't know, in like a 3 hour, very rambling conversation, I learned more about energy and nuclear power, I think, than any, one concentrated 3 hour period than I ever have in my life. And he was just a really amazing man. And I appreciate it. I spent a lot of time in North Idaho in Sandpoint, and Bob grew up in Dover, which is now they've kind of grown together. And so I think that is actually, he had a condo out at Hope for a long time. And so it was just cool to make the connection and learn about the history of the Tri-Cities and energy. And I think, you summed it up really well with Bob, is even though he had this deep history, he was actually the first chairperson of the board of TRIDEC when we formed as TRIDEC in '85. But he was always looking to the future. And so I think his investment and really kicking off INEF was so key, as you just described. So Noel, as the director of INEF, can you talk about like, what will the Institute do? What are some of the maybe key things that you see, be it research, curriculum, anything? I think especially, and this was some of the conversation I know when the governor was here in December talking about policy. And I think, here in Washington, we know that the state is very focused on policy that is aimed at reducing carbon as an example, but what roles could INEF play within that maybe analytic framework for policy, for curriculum education, and then maybe research development?
Yeah, so, Sandra's done an amazing job of getting this off the ground. I'm very, very honored to be able to help the next phase of this related to INEF. As we look at INEF, what we're trying to do is look at a systems approach to our challenges as we talk about energy and energy futures. And one of the things we see is, like, as a power engineer, I worry about the grid. But now we're gonna take transportation and electrify it. We're talking about doing more electrification of buildings. Well, how does that impact the grid? And how do we make sure that we're talking to the different groups? And really that is what INEF is about, is the systems approach to looking at energy opportunities and challenges. And when we start to talk about the system approach, in addition to the kind of geek out engineering stuff that we do, we also have to look at some other important issues. And we're excited to have 4 new faculty positions, permanent faculty positions in the Tri-Cities campus that are going to be around some of those other areas that help with the energy activities of the future. One is looking at a life cycle, looking at the whole life cycle across an energy space. One is about economics. What are the economics that we look as we talk about what's happening with energy right now, and at a system approach. Then another one is data analytics. How do we look at all the data we have out there and come up with trends and help us look at where we should be investing and working for the future? And then the last, but certainly not least, and probably one of the most important, is the energy equity. how do we make sure everyone is part of our energy future and the opportunities that come with clean energy? So those are the 4 new positions. And with those positions, those are tenure track positions. So we will have 4 folks doing, in addition to teaching, doing research in those areas. And so we're really excited about that. And I want to say, coming to the state of Washington 7 years ago, I really learned a lot about Eastern Washington, and I call it the power, because we really have a lot of technical strength in Eastern Washington in the energy and power space. And, Pacific Northwest National Lab, PNNL, WSU as a system. And then also when we look at industry that's in the Columbia Basin. And one of the most unique things I think in the Columbia Basin is the diversity of generation that we have and how that's going to play into the energy futures. So I see INEF providing opportunities, obviously, for teaching and some programs where we, may look at, we're already looking at energy certificates and other things in the area, but also research. But probably the most important activity is really engaging the community to look at these energy futures and how do we make sure we have the workforce of tomorrow and the research to make those informed decisions. And last, I'll say the other great thing is while it's headquartered in the Tri-Cities, we can also leverage the talent and expertise across the WSU system in the energy space. So we don't have to recreate the wheel here. We can leverage the research activities across WSU, our different campuses, our research and extension centers, and see how do we pull all that together to help work on an energy future, first for the state of Washington, then the Pacific Northwest, and then beyond. And we really want to be a model for that in the future.
Yeah.
For just a minute.
Yeah, I was going to ask, anything else to add, please?
Noel did a great job in explaining that. I think that one of the things that's really important is when we were looking at this, we wanted to come up with a unique space because WSU has huge strengths in energy research across the system. And we wanted to be able to use those, but then use them in a space that's not necessarily being occupied. So that whole idea that Noel mentioned of taking a systems approach, analyzing things that we may not always analyze or look at if we're in a siloed research area, but looking at those things like what is the environmental impact of what we're doing? How do we make sure that our energy is reliable and affordable? How do we make sure that we're not causing energy inequities as we have in the past? So that analytical piece is the piece that we're really adding into what the WSU system already does. The other piece that Noel mentioned, which I think is incredibly important that I did not mention earlier, is the presence of Pacific Northwest National Laboratory here in the Tri-City. They are, no pun intended, a powerhouse in energy and all kinds of research, including storage and generation, and they're doing some analytics of their own as well. That partnership that we can have because of the close proximity to Pacific Northwest National Laboratory is vital to how we move forward with the Institute for Northwest Energy Futures.
Yeah, no, those are really important points to add. And because we talked, and I love Noel's description of power for like the Eastern Washington and in the Northwest. And I just have to say, just like Coach Dickert said, that WSU is a Power 5 school. So I just wanted to keep on the power thing and throw that out there just to keep it rolling. Also acknowledged women's volleyball. I just looked it up, is number 4 in the nation. So as long as we're talking about WSU, we have to talk a little bit about sports and very, very successful programs, of course. For those of you joining us on Zoom today, I did want to add, if you have a question for Noel or Sandra, you can put it in the question and answer box down below. And if you're watching us on social media, please put your questions in the comments and we'll do our best to get to any questions that we might have. So Noel can, and I, as you were kind of going through the outline for INEF, I just read an article this morning that said because of a reduction in hydropower, mainly in China, kind of due to climate change and drought, that carbon had actually gone up, and it was mainly from from Asia in general. It kind of said like in general that carbon from the U.S. had reduced by about 8%, but there was like this 9% increase in Asia, and they kind of attributed it to climate change. I mean, is that something like when you talk about, and we always talk about, since I've been here, when we talk about new companies that are interested in coming to the Tri-Cities, we always say, look, we're very unique in that diversity of our power. There's probably maybe nowhere else in the country that within about a half-hour drive, you can touch 4 forms of non-emitting electrical generation, which is pretty unique, and you said it really well. But that analysis of different generation techniques and even like carbon emissions, is that some analytics or things that INEF would get into as an example on the research side?
Yeah, definitely. That would be something we would be looking at is, generation adequacy is a huge issue moving forward. And you brought up the fact, as we see climate change and we see temperatures change, we've been very fortunate. We have hydro, but we also have snow, and snow is our huge battery. People don't always appreciate that. But even a small temperature change of half a degree can then cause what was snow that can go through the dams in July and August to become rain in March and April, which means it goes through at a much different time. And the other challenges that we need to work with are looking at the what we call the nexus between water, energy, and land or food. And as we talk about hydro and there are other people using the rivers as well. And so how do we work to how do we look at whether analytics and working there? So yes, definitely the data analytics, looking at storage as we talk about, one of the challenges or opportunities on solar and wind is we can't control it. Mother Nature controls it. Yeah. And so how do we store that so when we need it, we can use it? And there's a lot of analysis that goes into that. There's a lot of modeling and simulation activities. And how do we do that when, okay, everyone's coming home at 5 o'clock and is going to plug in their EV? What is that going to do to the grid? And how do we make sure we have enough electrons that are going to be available for you to plug in your EV, or have a control system that alternates charging them overnight so that we continue to have reliable and resilient power grid, also at a cost that we can afford.
Thank you. We talked about the question and answer feature, and we have 2 questions already from our friend Bob Schutz from Energy Northwest. and I think he's actually asked very good questions where we are in the conversation. So yes, as an institute that will address policy issues, do you see an opportunity for political science degrees within the institute? Is that something you guys have looked at? Maybe that's a question for Sandra.
So not political science per se, but we could look at it. So let me just tell you what we have been doing, because curriculum is going to be a big and important piece. Through our grants with the DOE innovation prize that we've won, we've actually started to integrate energy curriculum or energy topics into our curriculum. And so our students actually get an overview of energy in their very first classes now. And I am talking English and history, so that it's going to be embedded in our curriculum so that our students can see themselves in the future jobs, or in the jobs of a decarbonized energy future, or understand what that might mean. And know that there's going to be a lot of different kinds of jobs in a decarbonized future. So that's already taking place. I think the next thing that we'll be looking at is a systems engineering degree, perhaps. And we've also talked with our business college about the business of energy, and could we do an MBA with a focus on decarbonized energy. There are some models across the United States for MBAs in energy, but this one would be on decarbonized energy. Political science would certainly be there. But I want to go back to the business for a minute, because it's not just informing policy, we also want to be that honest broker for industry. Because if, industry is having to deal with this, businesses are having to deal with decarbonizing their sectors or their particular companies, and being able to provide them information about how to do that in a meaningful and productive way is also something we want to take on.
Yeah, if I can add
of
a
course.
little bit, before, I think Sandra's point is one of the things we're starting at a point with INEF, and we're going to see evolution of opportunities and looking at, political science. And I saw the second question, I'll try to answer it a little bit too, is communications, technical communications. And, I see that as an amazing opportunity in the Tri-Cities. Is how do we, and I've been doing some work in Pullman, connect the Murrow College of Communications with our engineering school to look at how do we better communicate the challenges and opportunities around energy. As engineers, we're used to talking to other engineers. And what we want to do, and I think political science comes into this, is how do we help engineers talk about things so the public, the non-technical public, understands the challenges and opportunities that we have moving forward. And I think our Murrow College of Communications, we're talking about ways to do more of that, to help our engineers communicate better, and our STEM professionals communicate better some of those challenges and opportunities to a public audience. And so, I think that's another area of opportunity in the future, is looking at technical communications. And we'll need to continue to work on that, but I think it's one of the most important things moving forward is, and as Sandra said, the honest broker, but as an honest broker, you have to communicate it in a way that the public understands, not just the technical. And so you've got to have ways to explain some of the energy futures, the challenges and opportunities, so that anybody understands, where we're moving and what we're doing. So I definitely see the political science opportunities in those areas. And I think we're just going to have to evolve as we see INEF grow, what makes the most sense on the Tri-Cities area, in the Tri-Cities area, for programming to help move the community forward.
We already have a professional science and technology writing certificate here, and I think that would be an amazing thing to put at least as part of the curriculum or under the umbrella of INEF. I think that's a really good point, Noel. I was also going to, I think the whole idea, and maybe this is, I'm looking at Bob's question here. One of the things that we also want to do when we're looking at data analytics and we're looking at the social aspects of energy, part of that data analytics is going to be looking at people's behavior and people's attitudes, and getting proper information out about what it means to put up transportation lines and what it means, or transmission lines, not the power engineer in the room, clearly, put up transmission lines. And is that something we want to continue to do, or are there better ways to put energy sources in the areas that are heavily using the energy sources? And so getting some information out to the consumer, and also analyzing what consumer behavior is, so that we can help impact the effect of consumer behavior on the grid. And as Noel said, we're all going to have our electric cars, we're all going to plug them in at once, but we're also home plugging our cars in, cooking dinner, washing our clothes. And so how can we make sure that the consumer behavior matches what we need to do to have that reliable energy?
Yeah, that's really well said. And I'm not sure if everybody can see Bob's question, so I'll just ask it because you guys covered it really well. It's recognized that a reliance on renewable energy resources that are land intensive will require a large build out of transmission. State has struggled for a decade to build new transmission. The I-5 corridor is an example. It's not necessarily a policy issue, but more a public engagement issue. How might the Institute impact this dynamic communications education? And I have to say, because a long time ago, I worked for a large manufacturer, Caterpillar, and I started out, wanted to be an engineer because I grew up in a shop, but like college chemistry kind of killed me. So then I got a communications degree. When I worked for Caterpillar, my title was project engineer, but as a marketing guy. So my job was actually to communicate with the customers, develop like a functional spec and then kind of translate it to the engineers. But we sat as product teams. I think that's what you guys talked about, is that it's so awesome that anytime that education, WSU Tri-Cities in this case, or WSU system, will say, can take an industry approach. Like once you graduate as an engineer, or, as a communications major, you would be sitting as integrated product teams or project teams or something like that. So to do that in college, it both gives you a chance to practice those techniques. And obviously, I think anything project-based in education, right? So that you integrate these different classes or these different subjects that you're taking, and then have that real world application while you're in college is a huge opportunity for kids and for students, because you're modeling what industry does and how industry works. I think that's a really, really good point. And so encouraged, obviously, that you guys are thinking in those terms, because I think for students, or just as people, right, we all want to answer the why question. Like, why is this chemistry class important? Why is this communications class important? And to show them while they're in college the connection into your job, your future, your industry, small stuff like saving the planet or whatever it may be. I think those are, that inspires people. So I think that's awesome.
No, and
yeah, go ahead.
Energy and industry is going to require all kinds of people and all jobs. So I'm really heartened that we're taking an interdisciplinary approach to INEF.
Yeah. We'll keep on with our questions. We've got one from Stephen Danver at CBC. What do you see as the best way to integrate the forward-looking work at INEF with the need to educate and train a future-minded energy workforce? And we'll just have a jump ball. If anybody wants to take this one.
So, as I said before, I think that the way in which we present our curriculum is going to be really important. And I don't know if anybody knows about the DOE Innovation Prizes, but we've won 2 of these to make sure that we're educating the workforce of the future, and especially the future workforce that is here in the Tri-Cities. So a very diverse workforce, and get a lot of first generation, a big majority of Hispanic students, and of course working with the tribes to make sure that we're educating that workforce of the future. So starting there. As we move forward, one of the things that we identified as very important is getting that energy curriculum or the energy topic into the curriculum very early on. So again, English and history, and then helping them see how they might fit into that future. So one of the things that we think is extremely important is not just the workforce of the future, but these are the people that are going to be the leaders, and we want them to have a good seat at the table. We want that diversity to have a seat at the diverse individuals to have a seat at the table in moving us forward into that clean energy future. I would also say that partnerships are going to be incredibly important. I know that we have a very good relationship with CBC, and I know that they do some things around energy at CBC that we don't do. And it would be great for us to work together to make sure that we are getting the entire gamut of workforce that we're going to need, because we're going to need trades to PhD. And the more we can work together to make sure that that happens, the better, I think.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think the Tri-Cities has a very unique opportunity for students to be connected with industry as an undergraduate and moving forward related to that. And I think Sandra mentioned partnerships with CBC, but I would say, I think as we look at this generation of student, they are asking why. And, when I went through school as an engineer, we did the equations first, and then we did the applications at the end. And we have to swap that with these students because they do want to save the world. They want to make an impact. That's a higher priority often than even salaries for some of the students. And so, but how do do they know they're going to make an impact? If I can tell a student that, hey, I worked on a research project that helped electrify a village in India, you know, that's a story that's a hook that's like, oh, I want to learn more about that. And, you know, Sandra mentioned the innovation prizes. So we need to do a better job of talking about the impact you can have in these degrees for high school, for early career undergraduates, so that they're excited about, oh, I want to learn more about this. And, you know, as engineers, we get nerdy really quickly. So we got to remember that when we're recruiting, that we need to talk about the opportunities around clean energy, around, you know, making an impact and coming up with new technologies that enable those clean energy solutions, and looking at all the other aspects. So I really think, you know, one of the big advantages of an area like Tri-Cities is our students can have internships. We can have people in the classroom talking about real problems and how they're challenging, and, you know, where they need staff. That's going to encourage students to pursue those degrees, but also retain and say, hey, this is something I want to do.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to what, which is connected to this conversation, which is, I really appreciate both you being on. I think this is, it's so exciting to learn about the opportunities, and Noel, as you described it, the evolution of INEF and the things that could happen in the future. And I know, you know, we just had a couple questions from Bob Schutz, and he always talks about when he hires new engineers, they do some just interviews and just some time together. And he always brings it up, which I think is a great point to what you're talking about, in the younger generations, as they come into Energy Northwest, a nuclear power operator, right? The only one in the Northwest. He asks them, why do you want to go to work for us? And they say, I'm really concerned about climate change. And I think for previous generations, you know, like maybe our generations and older, as an example, like Noel, to your point, how do people get information about energy? And when we think about nuclear, you know, our generation and older think about 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, right? Like they don't think about the fact that I think it's like 10 to 20% of the US power comes from nuclear today, and it's clean and it's not emitting and it's not carbon. And there hasn't ever been a death, you know, from nuclear energy, and all these facts and figures. But they think about these things that, like in the 70s and the 80s, on into Fukushima, that kind of created like a fear of nuclear. And then also, you know, the atomic age and nuclear weapons and the differentiation between those. So, you know, thinking of those examples, and you talked about it a little bit, to be able to talk in these terms, do you think we have an opportunity with younger generations to, you know, to kind of reset, and nuclear just being an example, because obviously integrating all the energy sources is the key. But any ideas about that? Like, how do we change that dynamic? Because I think even in research that's been out for a while now, you'll see that younger generations don't have those kind of older, let's say, stereotypes, you know, in relation to types of energy and stuff. But any thoughts on that? Like how can we change that even that communications or that awareness paradigm, you know, through things like INEF and even your curriculum?
Yeah, so I'll start on this one. So, you know, I think engaging students with real world problems up front is the most important thing. And, you know, not waiting till the senior year to say, hey, these are cool things happening. And to have, as I said earlier, to have engaged, also to have industry come in. You know, I say sometimes as a faculty member, I'm like an academic parent. The students don't really listen to me about some things, but if an engineer comes in from Energy Northwest and says the exact same thing, they're like, Dr. Schultz, did you hear? We need to worry about communicating, because the Energy Northwest person said, like an academic parent. So I think having, you know, really those examples are so important, because it helps you visualize where you're going to be in your future. And when you look at differential equations, you can't necessarily visualize how is that going to impact? What am I going to do with that? And so really by having that connection, and we're, you know, and whether that's with our partner PNNL and looking at the R&D space, or whether that's, you know, the other energy folks across the Tri-Cities, they're really great examples to get the students to see, oh, this is something I might want to do, or this area is an area I want to learn more about. And so it's really about creating those connections for the students, because that's really going to give them the resiliency to get through the differential equations class, because I want to make a
Yeah.
difference in this case, where if you don't really have that goal out there about, if you don't have something that you see, a vision, it's harder to say, I want to continue in this path when you hit that first challenge.
Wow. Sandra, anything to add to that or any
I
additional thoughts?
love the academic parent analogy. That was
Yeah, that was great.
sometimes that does happen, but I agree with Noel, is that practical experience, the relevance is important from day one, and we should get a little bit better about that. As academicians is what I'm going to say, we are blessed in the Tri-Cities to have a lot of industry engagement, and I give a shout out to the Hanford contractors, to Energy Northwest, to PNNL, and other companies that really take our students under their wings. I'm going back again to the DOE Innovation Prize. In our second round, what we also added to that curriculum was the energy ambassadors, and we connected students with people who were in the industry, in the energy industry, very early on in their curriculum. And we got such a great response from industry for our call for mentors. It was really heartening, and it is amazing how the Tri-Cities will step up to the plate. The Tri-Cities industries will step up to the plate to truly help our students move into the jobs of the future, some of which we don't even know what those jobs are, but they're willing to discuss that with them. So that is, it's a great place to be for that.
Yeah, definitely. Sandra, you've talked about it a couple of times, and I wanted to go back to it because I know it was a very competitive process, and rightfully so. You and your team at WSU Tri-Cities are proud of the DOE Inclusive Energy Innovation Prize. But can you give us a little more? You just talked about it in reference to it, but can you tell us a little bit more about what that is? And then maybe Noel, I wanted to go back to you to talk about the Department of Energy and the Biden administration have the Environmental Justice 40 initiative, and we talked about energy equity with impacted communities. Wanted to maybe go back and reference your trip to India that you just did. But Sandra, can you start off with the Inclusive Energy Innovation Prizes and some other things that you're doing with those prizes at WSU Tri-Cities?
Well, absolutely. And I think what you just said, the Justice 40 goals of the Biden administration and the CERT goals of the state were really part of the inspiration for us moving to apply for these prizes. Actually, the energy justice goals, or the Justice 40 goals, excuse me, of the Biden administration is that, in a nutshell, I'm not going to get it completely correct, but in a nutshell, that 40% of the benefit of the clean energy money that's going out from this administration needs to somehow benefit underrepresented populations. And so the DOE Innovation Prizes are fairly unique in that because of this mandate, they asked, the DOE asked the community, how would this benefit the your community? And we were able to answer the call creatively with education. Now, there are other creative ideas in there. There was 268 applicants in the first pool. 18 of us were selected. And in the second round, they brought the 18 back. And then 6 of us were selected. I believe we were the only truly education project. There were other projects in there of how energy could benefit underrepresented populations. My favorite was from New Orleans. It was called Get Lit, Stay Lit. But it was all about how to continuously provide energy during natural disasters. So it was, how do we make sure that our underrepresented communities can have power that they need if there's another Katrina, for example. So anyway, it was, so a lot of innovation came out of those prizes, and we were really fortunate and grateful that they put the emphasis on education, because we're putting the emphasis, of course, on education. So
thank you. And Noel, to follow up on that, before we came on, you shared a trip that you're just on to India, working with a group of, I think a group of Indian women that had an agricultural concern. And I think this has been a really good discussion, but I wanted to even make sure we talked a little bit more about agriculture and the connection with energy as well. As you guys said, and then of course, land grant institution, right? Like these are base parts of the WSU system, of course, and then our region in the Columbia Basin. But can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, when you brought up India, I think in my mind, when I think about agriculture and the connection to industry, I think about irrigation. But I think in your example, when you're in India, for example, and you start off with no electrification, that the first thing they electrified sounded like more of the processing. But can you talk about that trip, and then maybe some connections with agriculture and INEF that you're thinking about as you go through that evolution of INEF?
Sure. So WSU is the U.S. lead for a large $30 million project with the Department of Energy, working between the U.S. and India. We have 16 U.S. partners, 15 India partners. And this was about looking at advanced distribution systems where we included storage and renewable energies. So basically, what we call the last mile or the last kilometer in India that get that power. And as we look at more solar, look at storage and techniques. And one of the really cool things that I got to see actually a week ago today was we actually electrified a village as part of this project. Wow. And in 2019, I went and visited with the ladies of the village before they got electricity and talked to them a little bit about what that meant to them, what they thought it was going to be. But the cool thing was last week, I actually got to meet with them again. And I said, what surprised them the most of that? And so hopefully you can see the picture.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is a picture of myself as well as Meryl Smith, the DOE program manager, with the ladies from this village. And one of the things that was able to do, electricity was able to do, was help in multiple areas, in health, in as well as commerce, health, safety, commerce, and education. And in this particular case, this building you see was built as part of our project right on the site where there's solar energy. And so they were able to use different processing equipment. So this rice is now marketed and it's organic. And so it's very popular across, but there's 700 women that are part of this ag co-op that now can do much more. We also had some solar pumps that were enabling them to have another season because they could pump water in the off season. So, wow. That was really a cool experience a week ago to talk about. But I think the other interesting thing is because of some of our work on the microgrid in India, we worked with Sonomish PUD and the Tulalip tribe to talk about a microgrid for their administrative building, the Tulalip tribes. And so, it's talking about how do we use technology we learn in one place to help in another location. But as I said earlier, there's this nexus between food, land, ag, and water, and energy. And so, as we look at, Sandra mentioned some of our work in sustainable aviation fuels and looking at, what are the different feedstocks for some of those different fuels and what we're using in that case. And that's part of INEF as well. I'm kind of talking more about the grid because that's my space, but there's a lot of other aspects of that. But really, as we look at providing energy, as we look pumps, obviously having energy to pump water to where it needs to be for irrigation, hydro, obviously the water connection there as well. So, there's a lot of different aspects as we look at agriculture and feeding the world, and how do we, I once was at a talk at the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, and he said the most important issue for agriculture is electrifying, is energy, is having power so you can process, so you can store. There's a lot of things around agriculture that you need electricity, or it gives you different opportunities than when you don't have electricity. And so particularly in rural areas and looking at electricity is going to be a really big part of that. And so, you know, I think we need to find ways. One of the other big things quite often ag is kind of the agricultural needs are kind of out, maybe out in the middle of nowhere compared to where the grid is. So how do we come up with microgrid solutions that help provide power out in those areas? Because the grid, because the lines aren't necessarily going there. And in the case of India, they're not reliable. They were only getting power 6 to 8 hours a day. And so now they have 24/7 power. And so how do we look at solutions in the ag where ag needs electricity and moving forward?
I think what you just said, Noel, is so important because again, it's that connection between ag and energy in general. And one of the things that, you know, we've been working on and we know from living in this area is that whole idea of how important the circular economy is. So getting the power to agriculture, the agriculture can, you know, the agriculture then feeds the world, but then that's what we might consider waste or had considered waste in the beginning. That feedstock then goes back into the biofuels. And now we have more of a circular economy that we're looking for as we decarbonize. So we bring the fuels back into the power side. It is all reciprocal. And it fits again with our area so well that is focused on agriculture and energy and the environment. And so I think that's a very important point. And one of the other things I'd just like to give a plug for, if I can, is that idea of sustainable aviation fuel. We have one of the first researchers in the country on our campus in sustainable aviation fuel, and we are doing partnerships in Everett with Payne Field on developing out even better testing capabilities for sustainable aviation fuel. So not only are we working really well on the power side, that fuel side is, oh, not to have another pun, but really taking off too.
Well, and Sandra, 4 minutes early, you just pulled where you started when you talked about the history of INEF back into how it's this nexus of ag, energy, and water and the environment. I mean, like that was perfect, but we were 4 minutes early. So because of that, because of your plug for the for Bessel and sustainable aviation fuels, I just have to bring up that next week at the convention center, there's a bioenergy summit, which we're really excited about. And, you know, they totally asked the wrong person, but I have introduced a chance to actually introduce Josh from Bessel, and I'm spacing on the lady's name from PNL also, but they're kind of the keynote speakers. I have a chance to talk about Energy Forward Alliance that Sandra, because I think you wanted to be in our small team, but I was like, oh, you're so busy. Let me take this one for you. So I'll just say on your behalf and on behalf of all of our Energy Forward Alliance funders and the really great team of TriDec board members that came together to do it. Energy Forward Alliance, I think, has definitely an alignment with INEF, and so it's a new organization that will be part of TriDec. And we'll see where it goes, but it's really focused on, just like INEF is a way to showcase the whole WSU system and all the things that we just talked about. Energy Forward Alliance will be focused on the Tri-Cities in our region and showing how we can become, if we're not already, the pilot for where companies and people look to decarbonize a whole community. So, you know, obviously in the energy sector, transmission for energy sector, but then as we get possibly into industry and industrial emissions, which we know the state has the Cap and Invest program, CCA, that's coming down. And then also, you know, transportation fuels, buildings, all those things. I think as we get into it, we're looking forward to it. So just a brief plug for EFA. And I didn't want to put you on the spot because you know, but yeah, but Sandra and WSU are one of our founders and funders. So.
EFA, and I think that's an amazing, it's an amazing, what am I trying to say? It's an amazing thing. And that's not the word I'm looking for, that TriDec an amazing service that TriDec is venturing into for the Tri-Cities. So thank you for bringing that up.
No, and I think that I think it just shows the partnerships that we all have, right? And it's not a Tridec thing. I think it's really fortunate and blessed to work at Tridec. Like Tridec represents the community, you know, our board, our organization, EFA, and the other things that we're all involved in really represent the whole community. It's not about one entity or the other, but so we're down to a really short amount of time, but this has been great. I know, Sandra, we talked about it and you're like, what are we going to talk about? But I think the conversation just flowed. I learned a lot about it. And I really appreciate both your time and we are so excited to help and support in any way possible as a community, INEF and the growth and the evolution. But Noel, any closing comments you want to leave us with?
No, I just look forward to the opportunity to interact even more with the Tri-Cities community. And, you know, if people are interested, please reach out to me. My email's easy to find. And, you know, you're going to see a lot more of me. And I look forward to working with the different organizations in Tridec and the Tri-Cities on this challenge and opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for your time. And we look forward to spending more time with you too and working together. Sandra, we're going to close us out.
Well, I just have to say ditto and here to what Noel said. So agreed, we are very excited to work with the community and reach out to us because this will be, well, clearly it's a system-wide issue for WSU and it's a very much a community issue for the Tri-Cities. And we think that like Energy Northwest, we could be a model for a decarbonized future. Get that little shout out there.
There you go. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We will be back next week with another Coffee for Karl. Sandra and Noel, thanks for your time and for joining us today. And to round us out in the right way, I just have to say, go Cougs.
Go Cougs.
Thanks everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.